So I came across this bin while I was doing some spring cleaning a while back, and I thought it was kind of interesting. It brought back some memories. This bin is labeled Old 1911 Tools. I'm going to share with you some of the stuff that we used to do, some of the tools that were required to achieve and build an amazing gun. But a lot of this is outdated because of the modern machining. And modern machining has allowed to produce some really high quality pistols nowadays, cutting out a lot of the really painstaking work that we used to do. So this is kind of a blast from the past. So let's get into this and see what we got. This right here is a set of slide rails, and we use these on basically every single gun. When I was working at Clark's at my grandfather's shop, everybody had a set of these. Anybody that did slide to framework anyway. And the way these work is if you have too much, or if you want to do an accuracy job, we called them accuracy jobs back then. If you want to do an accuracy job, you need to tighten up the slide to frame fit on a pistol. So each one of these shims is marked with the thickness of it, and they go in 1/1000 increments. So this is 111 thousandths thick shim, and there's a lot of play in there. So that's not even close. Let's go to, let's try 115 thousandths. That fits pretty snug. So the way these work is, if you had side-to-side play, but you were happy with the up and down fitment, you would fit the plate, the shim in there that would fit perfectly, or as perfect as you could get. And then you would take, say a 4-ounce slide hammer or rail hammer, and you would peen that rail out. So the shim is going to prevent the rail from being bent down, but since you're hitting it with a hammer, it's going to pooch that metal out to the side. And essentially, you're doing the same thing as running a bead of weld and then recutting it. Well, this, you're peening it down and pooching that metal out and then recutting it. If you wanted to remove some of the up and down slop, you would get a shim, let's go with a 113, where there's quite a bit more play there. And then as you're hitting it, the rail will get smashed down, and then it would start going out. So you can kind of fine tune it or tweak it with the thickness of the rails, depending on whether you want to take up and down play out or just side to side or both. Peening slide rails is a very time-consuming and labor-intensive process. Some of the old-timers back at Clark's, they would have a hammer similar to this, and they would grip it with their finger in about that position there, and they would just tap, 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 and they would wear through hammers. There's a couple hammers that I've seen the old guys at Clark's would have, and that finger would wear almost, it's probably over 50% of the way through that handle. That's the repetitiveness of the slide to frame fit. So luckily, we don't do that anymore. Now, I should say, we don't offer that, and we don't build guns that way now. It's still a very viable process if you have an old gun, you just want to gunsmith it. But what we do now is we start with oversized parts, and then we machine them. And if we overcut them by accident, we don't peen them out. We get a new gun and start over. So we don't peen anything, any of the guns that we build nowadays. We don't peen any of that. But it's still fun to have around, and still fun to keep that skill alive if you're interested. And this next thing, these are dangerous. Slide spreader. Let's say you peen too much, or you squeeze your slide too much, because that was the other process. You could put the slide in a hydraulic press and squeeze it, and that's how you could tighten the slide to the frame. But let's say you need to do the opposite. You need to open it up. These guys right here, grab a slide. So these slide spreaders, you open your vise up, and then these shoulders here, you put your slide on top of it like that. And then as you close your vise, those spread out. Slide spreaders, you want to avoid those if possible. The next thing we have in here, this is the equipment we would use to install an offset firing pin bushing. That just sounds like a lot of work. And the reason you would need to offset your firing pin was, I'm going to grab a barrel. So part of the accuracy job was slide to frame fit, and then you would weld, you'd fit the lugs, the bottom lugs and the top lugs. So we would weld up these bottom lugs. Well, when the barrel goes into lockup and stands on the slide stop pin, if you weld that up, now the barrel is higher. Well, if your firing pin is in a fixed location and you raise this barrel up, now your firing pin is low. If your firing pin gets out of whack enough, you're going to have light strikes or inconsistent detonations of the primer. And so this is a hardened piece of steel, and you can see the hole in it is offset. So you can rotate this around depending on where you need to move your firing pin to. It's also a smaller diameter. The original 45, had a much larger diameter firing pin. When they came up with the offset firing pin bushing fix, they often went to the smaller 38 Super 9mm firing pin, and that's kind of taken over today. Basically, every gun nowadays uses the smaller diameter one. It just works better. But yeah, in order to get that in there, you would have to drill. You have to drill out the breech face with a really long drill bit like that. And it was a multi-step process. You'd go with a smaller drill bit, and then you put your final drill bit size in there and drill to the correct depth, which we were doing this on drill presses, so it was, you had to know your drill press. It wasn't just put it in there and hit a number. There's a lot of feel to it. Oh, boy, as I'm talking about this, the nightmares just keep coming back, learning to do this. So internally on a slide, when the firing pin comes forward, it's tapered in there, so the firing pin is directed, out the hole where it should be. And so what you want to do, or what you had to do, is you had to drill down. You had to take the smaller diameter, your first drill bit, drill down until you saw that firing pin hole in the breech face just start to open up. And that means you should stop. You want a little bit of a shoulder in there, but you want to drill down until that firing pin hole just starts to open up, and then you hammer your offset firing pin bushing in there. And I mean hammer, it's a force fit, and it's a lot of force required. So then that's seated, but you had to keep the orientation of that hole, let's say in the 12 o'clock position or the 6 o'clock position. You had to maintain the orientation of that firing pin bushing while you're hammering it down. The problem, as we found out often, is not every brand of slide had a tapered firing pin hole on the backside. So you'd be drilling down, looking for that hole to start opening up, and then stop. Well, certain brands, you're drilling, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's no taper, and you just punched a giant hole through your breech face. So then you had to go custom make a oversized firing pin bushing, drill it larger so you can have a shoulder in there, and then install it. So yeah, a lot of headache, and then you've got a lot of little tools like this where it's drill bits on shafts, and all this is homemade stuff. You can't really go to the hardware store and buy this. Of course, places now like Brownells and Midway, there's a lot of cool trinkets and gadgets for the home gunsmith. But back then, you had to make it all. And this was the punch you'd use to hammer down, seat that firing pin bushing. So yeah, that was not fun. Put this away before it hurts somebody. Another reason we would put smaller diameter firing pin bushings in is all the guns at that time had the larger 45, and there was a lot of guns that, for example, when the 460 Roland came out, Clark Custom Guns and Johnny Roland got together and produced that 460 Roland. Was a really hot round, a lot of pressure, and you would get primer blowback through the firing pin channel. The firing pin hole was too large; it was letting too much, primer through there. So you put a smaller diameter firing pin hole, and that keeps a lot of the primer blowback. Because what would happen is you'd blow primer back in there, and it would get jagged, and then the barrel couldn't unlock, and it causes all kinds of issues. So smaller firing pin, much better.